use your personal vehicle for business purposes sometimes, such as dropping off inventory at retail partners, dropping off shipments at the post office, or driving to client meetings sometimes, then you can write off a portion of expenses like gas or EV charging fees, lease payments, maintenance, and more. This tends to be the most underutilized write-off by small business owners because you need to keep track of your mileage throughout the year to know what portion of these personal expenses can be written off as a business expense. You need to know both how much you drove overall as well as how much of that was specifically for business purposes, and you can't really just put that together forensically from gas receipts at the end of the year. Some people just make a best guess or estimation and submit that, but if you were to be audited by the CRA and you couldn't produce a mileage log, they could throw out your write-off and then you'd end up owing back taxes plus interest. To avoid that whole situation, I have both a mileage tracker as well as a vehicle expenses tracker in the Canadian small business system. Let's start on the settings and rules page first, as there are some things you can set up there that will automate some tasks on the vehicle sheets, and that'll save you some time. Vehicle expense settings and rules also begin on line 21. They are over to the right of the home expense amounts. And there's only a couple of things that you can set up as recurring payments for vehicle expenses. They are your loan interest. If you have a vehicle loan that you pay every month and there's interest on that, you can write off a portion of the interest, as well as lease payments. So if you have a regular lease payment that you make, again, you can write off a portion of that. There is a little bit more information that you need to fill in for those on the actual vehicle expenses sheet, but we'll get into that later. Any numbers you put in over here will get automatically ported over to that vehicle expenses sheet. So it saves you a little bit of time if they are the same amount every month. Underneath that, we can set up our vehicle expense rules, and they work exactly the same as your business expense rules or the home expense rules. You put the keyword here in column F, and then you put the category that should be applied to it over here in column G. Your choices are fuel and oil, loan interest, in case it's variable and not a regular amount, then you can do it manually over on the vehicle expenses sheet. Insurance, lease payment, again, if it's a variable amount and it's not the same every month. Repairs and maintenance, license and registration fees, EV charging fees, other, parking, and business insurance. I think most of the categories are fairly self-explanatory, but I did want to make notes on a couple of them. Parking is only for parking that was specifically for a business event. So let's say you sold your products at a farmer's market one weekend and it cost you $60 to park there for 2 days. That would count, and you actually get to write off that full amount instead of just a portion of it because it was purely a business expense. You wouldn't have paid for the parking if you weren't there to sell your things. Another example could be that you went to meet a potential client at a coffee shop for a consultation and you needed to pay for 2 hours of parking nearby. That would count too. However, if you pay for a monthly parking pass at the building where you work, that does not count and you do not get to write off any of it. Unfortunately, you can't write off any costs that are associated with a normal daily commute to your place of work. We'll talk about that more when we get to the mileage log. Business insurance is any supplementary insurance that you purchase on top of your regular vehicle insurance to be able to use your personal vehicle for business purposes. Basically, your regular vehicle insurance only covers you for commuting to work and running personal errands. But let's say that you're a photographer or a landscaper and you need to drive around a lot of equipment to do your work. If you were to get into an accident while transporting it, your standard insurance may refuse to cover the cost of any damages to your vehicle because it wasn't being used for the purpose that it was insured for at the time of the accident. If you frequently make deliveries, whether that's directly to customers or to retail partners, then you would need extra insurance on top for that as well. The good news is that you do get to write off the full amount of any extra business insurance you pay for, as again, that is purely a business expense. Let's move over to the vehicle log sheet now, as this is the key to being able to write off your vehicle expenses or a portion of them, and it is the thing that most folks are missing. To be fair, that's often because they don't know that they need one until they get to the end of the year and their accountant or their bookkeeper asks to see it. There are two numbers that you need to track. So there are two sections up here and then down here where you will need to track some amounts. Number one is the amount that you drove your vehicle in total. And technically the CRA only wants to know an annual number. However, for the sake of actually remembering to do it, I recommend logging your odometer amounts on a monthly basis. If I have to remember to do something in a week's time, I'm going to struggle. If I have to remember a year from now, I will 100% forget to do it. So I recommend doing it monthly. And I also also recommend taking a photo of your odometer as well as writing down the number, just that way you have some proof in case the CRA wants to see it. So very simple, you just write down the starting number at the beginning of the month in column B, and then the number at the end of the month in column C. The ending number will also be the beginning number for the following month, and if you forget to check until you're like 2 days into the month, that's close enough. Don't panic, just do it as soon as you remember. There is also a column over here for notes, just something to remind you why maybe one month was like weirdly high. You can write down a note that I drove across Canada that month. That way, you know, if it's 4 years down the road and you find yourself being audited and the CRA has questions, you'll remember why. To the right of your odometer log is the section for what was just business kilometers driven, and you do not need to manually fill this in. The system will do it automatically. It will use what you enter in the log down here to automatically generate these numbers. So don't touch anything here. So down here, starting on line 20, anytime you drive your vehicle for business purposes, you're going to make note of a few different details. You'll write down the date, where you went, what the purpose of that trip was, and then how many kilometers it was round trip. That means you need to take note of your odometer before you leave and then when you get back. If you forget to do it, you can always just use Google Maps to get the kilometers between the two addresses and then double it to get the round trip amount. If you have any notes to add, you can do so over here. You know, maybe there was construction that day and so the trip was longer than usual. Again, just to help you remember details way down the road in case the CRA has questions during a late audit. Once you have added a trip to the log, you will see the numbers next to the month that the trip was taken in update up top. So let's take a look at how that would work. So right now we have 0 kilometers driven for business in June, but if I add a trip, now I see I've got 15 kilometers driven for business for June up here. It's very important to note that, as I mentioned earlier, you cannot write off the cost of a daily commute. So if you drive to an office or another place that you work, 3, 4, 5 days a week, you can't write off the cost of any of that. If you have to drive to visit various clients at their locations every day or most days, again, that's just a part of your regular workday and you don't get to write it off. However, if you normally work from home and you have to make a special trip out to a client's location or their office one day, and that's outside of the ordinary, it's not something that you normally do, then you do get to write that off and you should log that trip. You can't write off the cost of commuting because it's just something that everybody has to do to earn a living, whether they run their own business or not. So under Canadian tax law, it's just considered a personal expense. The idea is to not give self-employed people an unfair advantage over others, and that does make sense. And that's all you have to do on this sheet. It's a little bit of a pain to keep on top of it, but making sure you're doing that regularly will mean that you have accurate records, and that's important. One half of vehicle write-offs is knowing how much you drove for business purposes during the year, and the other half is knowing how much you spent on your vehicle. So let's move over to the vehicle expenses sheet, and let's actually scroll down to line 55 where the expenses log starts. This is the part of the sheet that you'll actually need to interact with throughout the year. The top is just a report. That's where you'll get your final number for your accountant or to fill out your T2125 form. So down here, whenever you pay for something for your vehicle, you'll note down the date, the description, the amount, the category, and if you had set up a rule for the expense over on the settings and rules sheet, then the system will automatically apply the category for you. And then over here, you'll link up your receipt from where it is in the storage folder, as well as if you need to add any notes, they can go over here as well. When you add a new expense to the log, it will automatically add that number to the report section up top, as well as update your total write-off amount. So you don't need to manually update any numbers in the reporting section. It all happens automatically. Let's see an example of how that actually works. So I had a rule set up there that any purchases from Husky should get automatically categorized as fuel and oil. And then if I go up top to the fuel and oil section, I should see that number added to the June amount. So I have 2 purchases from June. Both were fuel and oil, $90 and $75. And then I've got $165 for my fuel under June. That's correct. And remember that if you have a recurring amount set up for your vehicle loan interest or lease payments, you don't need to add them in the log below. The system will automatically port them over from the rules and settings sheet. Let's take a closer look at the expense expense report up top. There are a couple of expense categories where you may need to enter some extra details, but they may or may not apply in your case. At the very top, the system automatically ports over from the vehicle log how many kilometers you drove in total that month, and then how many of those kilometers were specifically for business purposes. And from those two numbers, it automatically calculates what your business use percentage was. At the end of the year, this number right here is the one that's used to determine your personal vehicle write-offs. Below that, we have the various spending categories. The first line is how much you spent per month on that specific expense category. And then at the end of the year, under your annual total, the number that is bolded is the amount that you can count towards your personal vehicle write-off. You may have noticed that there's an extra line under vehicle loan interest for number of days interest was payable. So if you've had this lease the whole year, it was set up in a previous tax year, you can just put 365. However, if you just started paying this loan sometime this year, then you're gonna have to do a little bit of calculation. Let's say you took out the loan on September 20th. In that case, you'd put 102 right here in this cell because you had 10 days from September, 31 from October, 30 from November, and 31 from December. You only need to fill this number in if you have a vehicle loan that you're currently paying. Otherwise, you can just leave it blank or put 0. The other category that has some details to fill in, if it's applicable to your situation, otherwise just leave it, is lease payments. There are a few things to fill in here because the formula that the CRA uses to determine what you can write off from your lease payments is a bit more complicated than just what percentage of the time did you drive your vehicle for business purposes applied to what you paid for lease payments in the year. The good news is that the system will do the fairly involved calculations for you. You just need to give it some information. First, you'll need to fill in what the manufacturer's list price is for your vehicle. If you're not sure, just Google manufacturer's list price plus the year and make of your vehicle. Then you'll need to add the total value of the lease payments that you have made prior to this year. So if you just started the lease this year, that will be 0. Otherwise, you might need to dig out your lease agreement to see when it started and then use a calculator to figure out what that total amount would be. And then don't put that lease agreement away just yet because you also need to know the number of days that the vehicle has been leased in total. And yes, it has to be provided in days, not years, days. And that number will include this year as well. And then you'll need to enter either the HST rate in your province or the GST and PST rate. And if you live in a province or territory that doesn't have PST or HST, then you can just put 5% for GST. Finally, you'll need to put the year that the lease began over here in D49, and then the current tax year of the filing that you're working on in K49. When you have fully tracked how many kilometers you've driven in your vehicle log for the year, as well as all of your expenses have been entered in the expense log down below, and possibly some supporting information if necessary up here in the reporting section, then you'll get your full amount that you can use for your vehicle write-off for this year right over here, cell N53. I mentioned it earlier, but I find a lot of business owners don't take advantage of this write-off because keeping a log feels like too much work, or they just don't really have a good understanding of what the CRA wants to see in one. But just like the home expenses, personal vehicle write-offs can really add up, so it's definitely worth a little bit of administrative work to track your kilometers driven as well as your vehicle expenses. And hopefully now that you have a system to track all of this, it's going to feel more manageable, but let me know if you have any questions at all.